In 2021, an extremely bloody and violent zombie movie suddenly appeared. You may not have seen this film, but you must have heard its name. It is said that from the very beginning of filming, the director was determined to create a type of gore film that had never appeared in Chinese language cinema, and his inspiration even came from the dark American comic Crossed. One of the most shocking scenes even recreated a classic moment from a Serbian movie. So, apart from its heavy flavor, this film also mixed in some controversial elements. Before the movie was even released, the director used various gimmicks as a marketing tool, which made everyone look forward to it. But after its release, the reputation was terrible, with almost nothing but negative reviews. Because the scenes were too extreme, the movie was quickly banned or pulled down in most countries not long after its premiere. Today, let us take a look together at this infamous film, The Sadness. The story begins with a young couple who have just woken up in the morning, and they get into an argument about their travel plans. Kat finally managed to get 10 days of vacation, and they had agreed to travel together the following week. But with the date approaching, her boyfriend Jim told her that he had suddenly accepted a job from an advertising company, which happened to be exactly during that week. Because the pay was good, Jim did not want to give it up. Kat became angry after hearing this and walked into the bathroom to wash up. Seeing this, Jim had no choice but to comfort her, suggesting she apply to change her vacation dates. But when his girlfriend didn't respond, he turned around, took a bun from the fridge, and ate his breakfast while scrolling through short videos. Soon, a news report caught his attention. The host was talking with a virology expert about the outbreak of a recent epidemic. The expert told the host that most people thought it was just a normal flu, but he believed it was not that simple. From his research, the virus sequence was very similar to rabies, which meant mutation was possible. The host laughed and interrupted, saying he was talking nonsense because even though the outbreak had lasted for a while, there had been no deaths. Jim didn't take it seriously either, but when he finished breakfast and stepped onto the balcony, he saw an old woman behaving strangely on a rooftop below. He called out with concern. The woman slowly turned around, her white clothes covered in blood, staring blankly in his direction. It was obvious she was not normal. Just as Jim was confused, Kat finished washing up and came to the balcony, patting his shoulder. Jim told her there was a strange old woman on the rooftop, but Kat was not interested because she was running late for work. When Jim turned back again, the old woman had vanished. At that moment, a neighbor came out to water flowers, his face pale, and Jim learned from him that he had a cold. After a short chat, Kat prepared to leave for work. Jim immediately took his motorcycle to drop her off at the subway, but on the way, they witnessed a horrifying murder. The killer was caught by police on the spot. The victim was lying on a stretcher covered in blood, clearly beyond saving. This sight terrified them, and they sped away quickly. After safely dropping Kat off at the subway station, Jim passes the crime scene again on his way home, only to find the police car abandoned with its doors wide open. Though puzzled, he doesn't dwell on it. Back at his apartment complex, he went into a breakfast shop to order an iced Americano to take home. While waiting, a disheveled figure walked past him. She was barefoot, slowly walking into the shop, and it was the same old woman from the rooftop. Two young men eating nearby noticed her and kindly asked if she needed help, but instead of being grateful, the old woman suddenly spat liquid onto one of their faces. Everyone was stunned. Before the store manager could react, she grabbed him and slammed the freshly fried French fries down onto his head. Jim rushed forward to pull her away, but was horrified by her terrifying appearance. Even worse, the young man who had been spat on suddenly went mad and attacked his friend. Realizing something was terribly wrong, Jim backed out to the street in panic, while the old woman came at him aggressively. But in the next second, she was hit head-on by a speeding car. Jim carefully approached and saw she was dead, but to his shock, the driver was also insane. At the same time, the young man from the restaurant ran out chasing him, and another person even jumped off the roof. What was happening? When Jim turned again, several maniacs had already surrounded him, glaring like predators, and he fled in terror, with them chasing like zombies. Luckily, Jim was in good shape and ran straight back to his apartment, slamming the iron gate shut to keep them outside. Gasping for breath, he opened a beer to calm his nerves. He tried calling his girlfriend to check on her, but no one answered. Wanting to understand what was happening, he turned on the TV only to see warnings telling people not to go outside. It seemed the virologist had been right. The virus had mutated, and the infected had become extremely violent. Jim worried desperately about his girlfriend, but since she wasn't answering, he could only send her messages. Suddenly, a shadow appeared behind him, and before he could react, the person lunged at him with a pair of scissors. It was his neighbor, who immediately cut off 2 of Jim's fingers. Jim could only watch in horror as the crazed neighbor ate his fingers, cursing and muttering about taking care of Jim's girlfriend. Furious, Jim grabbed a tool and smashed it onto his head, then locked the door and fled, before the man could stand again. Even though he knew the outside world was even more dangerous, he still decided to find his girlfriend. But as soon as he stepped downstairs, he saw infected people brutally torturing a survivor. Since his motorcycle was still parked outside the restaurant, Jim had no choice but to risk retrieving it. Luckily, he managed to avoid being noticed and successfully reached his bike. But when he looked ahead, the street was full of infected, and if he started the engine, the sound would expose him. He had no choice but to take the risk, and as soon as he turned the ignition, the infected spotted him and charged. Jim fumbled nervously, but just before they reached him, the engine roared to life and he sped away. The infected chased after him, and one even fired a gun, shattering his rearview mirror. Jim pushed the motorcycle to its limits and finally shook them off, but he didn't know that his girlfriend was already in danger on the subway. Wanting to read in peace, Kat had turned her phone to silent, which was why she missed Jim's calls. But the middle-aged businessman sitting next to her kept trying to strike up a conversation, making it impossible for her to focus. Even though Kat made it clear she did not want to be disturbed, the man continued pestering her. When the train stopped, several new passengers boarded, and to avoid the annoying man, Kat gave up her seat to a woman named Molly. The carriage fell into silence, but no one expected the nightmare that was about to happen. A young man wearing sunglasses suddenly mutated, launching a frenzied attack on everyone around him. The businessman who had been harassing Kat was terrified. Kat was even more shocked, never expecting that the murder she had seen earlier in the day would repeat itself on the subway. As the number of victims grew, the carriage filled with the stench of blood. 2 passengers managed to subdue the young man, but more infected suddenly emerged from the crowd, attacking people around them. And the businessman suddenly mutated, stabbing Molly's left eye with an umbrella. Then the entire subway car fell into chaos. Luckily, the train stopped just in time, and Kat pulled Molly out to escape. But her phone was left behind in the carriage. They ran frantically through the underground passage, only to find that the businessman was chasing after them. In their panic, they turned a corner and accidentally bumped into a strong man. The man was about to get angry, but when he saw Molly was injured, he asked what had happened. Kat quickly begged him for help, pointing behind her and saying someone wanted to kill them. The man turned and saw the businessman, but without knowing the truth, he didn't notice anything strange and rushed forward to punch him. Yet the businessman immediately grabbed his head and bit him hard on the face. The man instantly lost his ability to fight, but the businessman didn't stop. He smashed open the fire emergency cabinet, pulled out the axe inside, and struck it down onto the man's head. Kat and Molly were terrified and ran for their lives, finally seeing the subway exit where a security guard stood. But when Kat pleaded for help, the guard not only ignored her but closed the gate in their faces. Fortunately, Kat didn't give up, dragging Molly forward desperately, and in the last second, they managed to escape. It turned out Kevin thought they were infected, so he chose to shut the door to protect himself. But the businessman trapped behind the door glared at them and said, "See you later." Kevin then quickly led them away, running toward a nearby hospital. Meanwhile, Jim, after escaping from the infected, kept riding his motorcycle toward his girlfriend's workplace. The scene here was even more horrifying, with dismembered limbs and body parts scattered all over the streets. After successfully passing through several blocks, Jim rode along the main road, only to find that the tunnel was blocked. Helpless, he turned into a side street, and while searching for a weapon, he stumbled upon a group of infected students tormenting someone. This time, Jim didn't stand by. Dealing with a few small infected was nothing to him, and he quickly chased them off. But when he checked on the survivor, he was shocked to find that the person was also infected, enjoying the torture, and even blaming Jim for interfering. Soon, the group of students returned and even invited Jim to join them. Not wanting to get involved in their madness, Jim immediately rode away on his motorcycle. At the same time, Kat and her companions finally reached the hospital. Because police were guarding the place, it had not yet fallen, and many injured victims had gathered there. A nurse quickly bandaged Molly and wheeled her into surgery. Only then did Kat remember to contact her boyfriend, but she realized her phone was missing. So she borrowed Kevin's phone, intending to let Jim know she was safe. But before she could dial, she was drawn to the TV broadcast, where a military general was speaking live. Things were beyond their control. Millions of people were infected. Riots were happening in cities everywhere. And unfortunately, they had not found any solution. Then the president appeared. He apologized to the public, said many comforting words, but gave no useful information. Finally, he promised to protect the people and to defeat the virus. But before his words even faded, the general beside him suddenly changed, his face turning fierce, and he took the president hostage, clearly infected as well. Everyone watched in horror as the general pulled out a grenade, removed the pin, shoved it into the president's mouth, and blew him to pieces. The hospital quickly descended into panic. Some people tried to escape but were stopped by the police at gunpoint. At that moment, Kat's eyes widened in terror as she saw the businessman outside the door. Frightened, she grabbed Kevin's phone and ran. The next second, the businessman swung his axe through the glass, killing the police, and countless infected surged inside, committing unspeakable acts. The hospital was completely lost. Kevin hid under a desk in the chaos. Meanwhile, Molly, who had just come out of surgery, once again fell into the hands of the businessman, and he carried out a cruel act on her injured left eye. Hiding under the desk, Kevin heard Molly's screams and, terrified, could only cover his ears, not daring to make a sound. Only when the screaming ended did he dare to crawl out. To his shock, he then saw several infected people engaging in intimate activities in the hallway. Kevin hurried to leave, only to stumble upon Molly in the next room, but now she had been infected. Molly held a chainsaw and walked toward him step by step. Kevin tried to run, but was caught on the spot by a large group of infected. His fate was predictable. At this moment, Kat was hiding in the stairwell, hurriedly calling her boyfriend for help. After hearing her situation, Jim promised he would come to rescue her and told her to quickly find a safe place to hide. But as he spoke, Jim suddenly felt dizzy, and after saying he would be there soon, he quickly hung up the phone. He had no idea that only a few minutes after hanging up, Kat was once again in danger. 2 infected people found her location, and Kat had no choice but to keep running. She ran upstairs, tied the fire door shut with an iron rack, and kept the infected outside. But to her shock, the terrifying businessman also caught up. Using his small frame, he squeezed through the gap in the door, but instead of letting the other infected in, he reinforced the fire door with the rack. It turned out the businessman wanted to keep Kat for himself. Knowing Kat had no escape, he began slowly searching for her, saying that Molly had already been dealt with, and now it was her turn. But Kat did not give up. She took advantage of his distraction, grabbed a fire extinguisher, and launched a surprise attack, smashing his head repeatedly until he was finally dead. At that moment, a door beside her opened and a man in protective gear appeared. Seeing the fire door being forced open, Kat had no choice but to follow him inside. Looking around, she realized this was a hospital maternity ward. Because he didn't know if Kat was infected, the man pointed a gun at her and forced her to handcuff herself to a pipe. After Kat obeyed, he turned on the valve and sprayed her body with a special chemical disinfectant. The man was none other than Alan, the virology expert who had appeared earlier on the news, and he had been hiding here to develop a vaccine, but had made no progress, and Kat's arrival gave him hope. Because someone like her, who had direct contact with blood without immediately mutating, was extremely rare. It was possible her body contained antibodies. Knowing Alan meant no harm, Kat slowly let her guard down. If her body really carried antibodies, she was of course willing to save this disaster. Alan then unchained her and gave her clean clothes to change into, but when Kat was about to throw her dirty clothes into the trash, she discovered a mutated baby inside. Before she could react, Alan suddenly injected a syringe of liquid into her neck and chained her back again. It turned out Alan had been experimenting on babies, but every one of them had mutated, and the syringe was filled with the virus because he wanted to test if Kat truly had antibodies, and if she showed no symptoms after 5 minutes, it would prove she did. At that point, he would take her to the rooftop helipad, board a military helicopter, and head to a lab to develop a vaccine and save everyone. But if symptoms appeared, Kat would be killed on the spot. Hearing this, Kat panicked. She didn't know what the outcome would be, so she sent a message to her boyfriend telling him her situation and begging him to hurry. Luckily, Jim had already arrived at the hospital, but his behavior was strange, walking in slowly with a machete in hand, even dropping his phone on the ground. Meanwhile, Alan contacted the helicopter and then pulled back the curtain to check on Kat. To his surprise, even after 5 minutes, she had not mutated, which confirmed she had antibodies. So Alan immediately took her out of the ward to head to the helipad. But after only a few steps, Alan was struck in the foot by an infected with an axe. In desperation, he pulled out his gun and killed the attacker. But another infected charged at him. Alan immediately fired, but the shot didn't hit the vital point. Instead, the infected vomited onto Alan's wound. Although Alan killed the attacker, he was already infected. Kat helped him forward, but at the door they ran into Jim. By now, Jim had already mutated, shocking Kat. Alan didn't hesitate. He fired a bullet into Jim's neck and he tried to fire again, but the gun jammed. Jim seized the chance, rushed forward, and killed Alan with one strike. Terrified, Kat ran, using Alan's keys to open the door to the rooftop, locking Jim inside. Even though she knew her boyfriend was no longer human, she didn't leave right away. She crouched down and asked about his condition. At this moment, Jim had not completely lost his mind. He could still speak normally, and his sweet words moved Kat deeply. But just as she hesitated about opening the door, Jim suddenly changed his tone, and his words turned into cruel threats. At last, Kat's hope was gone. She turned away, leaving him behind, and walked alone to the rooftop. Outside, the helicopter had long been waiting, and the movie ended here. After watching The Sadness, my feeling was that it existed only to be extreme, only to be bloody, with a sloppy story, no real depth, average effects, but lots of gore. Those suggestive shots did not show anything directly, but they were filled with temptation. Although the film's inspiration came from Crossed, it did not capture its essence, because Crossed, while violent and bloody, was also about the boundaries of morality and the exploration of human nature. If you like strong visual shock, you can go and watch the original film. This video ends here. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.